In this exercise, we are going to write a program that covers some basic operations that appear frequently in many array processing problems. Although we have discussed before on how to implement some commonly asked questions about arrays, for example, declaring arrays, initializing arrays, prompting the users to enter data and save them into the arrays, and printing the elements of the array. But that is not enough. We need to learn more on how to process arrays in an attempt to find a solution of a problem on arrays. And this is what we are going to do in this exercise. The first thing that is requested from this exercise is to prompt the user to fill an array of integers of size 10. So the size is fixed. We're not going to read it from the user. Simply, we are going to declare an array of this size. Let's go to JGrasp. We want to declare now the array, but for the size, we are going to use named constant, public, static, final, integer. I'm going to call it max size, which is equal to 10. In the declaration, here we will define the array, integer as an array. We will call it number equal to new integer, and the size will be the name constant maximum size. Now we prompt the user by printing a message by saying enter followed by the maximum size followed by enter 10 integers, so we display the message integers. Then since we are going to read exactly 10 integers from the user, so we create a loop that iterates 10 times, and the loop variable will be used as the index. So we write for integer I equals 0, I less than number dot length I plus a plus, and inside the loop for each iteration we save the value we read from the user into the corresponding index variable. So we write number between brackets I equal to read dot next int. In the first iteration, the first number we read from the user will be saved in number 0. In the next iteration, the next number we read from the user will be saved into number 1, and so on until we read the whole 10 integers and save them into the array. The next part of the exercise is to calculate the sum of all the elements in the array. So this is one of the basic operations that we can do on arrays to find the summation of its elements. In an attempt to find a solution to any problem that involves array, and if you want to process this array, ask yourself the following question. Do you need to visit the elements of the array one by one? If the answer is yes, then think about creating a for loop or writing a for loop and use the loop variable as the index of your array. Next, to solve this problem, and you want to visit the elements of the array one after the other. In which way you want to visit the elements of the array? Do you want to visit the elements of the array from the beginning until the end? I mean starting from index 0 until the last one? Or you want to start and process the array from end to begin? So you start from the last element and then comes down until you reach the first element. For our particular problem here, we want to find summation of all elements in the array. And you know how to find summation of a set of numbers. You read the first number, you add it into a variable sum. You read the second number and you add it to sum, and so on. Now, if we want to find the sum of the elements in this array, is there any difference if you add the numbers starting from left to right or starting from right to left? The answer is there is no difference. So let us explore how to implement any of these ideas, although sometimes if you start from the beginning to end, it is more simpler than if you start from end to begin. But to some problems on arrays, you have to start from end to begin, as what we will see in one of the parts of this exercise. So let us explore the first way. First, we will define a variable for the summation, and then we create a for loop, and we want to visit the elements of the array from left to right. That means the loop variable as an index to the array. We'll make it start from 0, so this is the first element, and we let it go until number dot length. And in each iteration, we need to take the index variable and save it into sum. So we say sum plus equal number between bracket number I. So now we are processing the array from left to right by visiting the first element, next element until the end. Every time we visit an element, we save it into sum. Before we show you how to find the sum of the elements starting from the last element, let me ask you this question. Can we use for each loop instead? The answer is yes. Why? Because notice you are visiting the elements one after the other and not going back and forth while visiting every element. So to use for each loop, we can say that for, and then we define the element that will be used to visit the elements of the array one by one, and we are going to call it, let's say, call it num, and it will be taken from number. In each iteration, we will add num into sum without using any indexed variable using the loop variable I. This way, you can visit every element from the array one by one, but the visit is from left to right. You are visiting the first element added to sum, adding the second element added to sum, and so on. So use for each only if you want to visit the array elements from left to right, and you don't need to go back and forth while visiting any element in the array. Now let us find the sum of the element, but this time let us start from the last element down to the first element. We will do it by two approaches. The first approach is by adjusting the loop variable. The second approach is by adjusting the index of the array. Let us explore the first approach. We will write for, and we will use the variable I. Now to reference the last element, then we will say number dot length minus 1. Remember that we don't have an element at length. And then we need to go down, so the index is decreasing until we reach the last value 0. And remember that the index should decrease by 1 because you are going from the last element until the first element. Simply here you say sum plus equal, like the way we have done it if we visit the elements from the beginning to the end. You just simply write sum plus equal number of I. So how the summation will work? It will first take the last value because I at the beginning will be equal to the last index, and then it will go to the one that is next to the last element, all down until we reach I equal to 0. The second approach to find the summation starting from the last element is that you write the for loop that visits the array elements from left to right. So we say for integer I equal to 0, I less than number dot length I plus a plus. So this is the loop that makes me visit the elements from left to right. However, how to index the last element when I is equal to 0? And how to index the element just before the last element when I is equal to 1? This is how we do it. We need to write an integer expression in terms of the length of the array and the index I. So we write number, and now here between the brackets we have to write an integer expression in terms of I and length that will do this adjustment. Now when I is equal to 0, I want to reference the last element. First I will start with the following expression, number dot length minus I. When I is 0, then we have length minus 0. So the last element will be at length index, but that index does not exist. Remember that indices of arrays, they start from 0 up to length minus 1. So therefore, when I is equal to 0, this expression will take me to the, not the last element, but the one that is just after the last element. So therefore, we have to subtract 1. Let us check that this expression is giving us the right answer. For our case here, we have 10 as the maximum size. When I is equal to 0, so we have the length is 10. 10 minus 0 is 10, minus 1, so it will give us 9. And that is correct, that if we have an array of 10 elements, the last index is 9. And when I reaches length minus 1, which is 9, Then 10 minus 9 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. So we are referencing the first element. So this equation works correctly. Let us run the program and test the result for each approach. But here we are using summation, so we need to initialize it at the beginning of every loop. So here we need to say sum equal to 0, and here also we have to say sum equal to 0, and here also we have to say sum equal to 0. We will save the program, compile it to make sure it does not have any syntax errors, but also we need to print the sum that is produced by each of these for loops. So here, after finding the summation, we need to print system.out.println. I will say sum is equal to plus sum appended by, let's say here, approach 1. We will repeat this print statement for each of the loops. Paste, and here we will say approach 2. We will go to the next loop and we will say approach 3, and finally for the last loop we will say this is approach 4. Let us run it again, and now it is asking to input 10 integers. We will simply enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And as you can see that the sum of all approaches is the same. In part 3 of the exercise, we need to find the largest number of the array, respectively the smallest. To find the largest and smallest, we need to define a variable for each of them. First, we need to define one for largest, and then we define another one for the smallest element. If you have an array and you want to find the largest and smallest, the approach is that you assume that the first element is equal to the largest and smallest, and we do this by writing largest is equal to number 0. And also we say that smallest is equal to number 0. And then for any subsequent number in the array, which is after the first number, if it is larger than largest, then replace largest by this number. And if it is smaller than smallest, also replace smallest by this number. So let us write the for loop for that. For integer I should start from 1 because number 0 is already assumed that it was largest and smallest. And then I will be less than number dot length I plus plus. Now in each iteration, we check for number I. If it is greater than largest, then we will replace largest by this number, which is number I. At the same time, we will check for number indexed by I. If it is less than smallest, and again we will replace smallest by this number, which is number I. Notice that we are using separate single if statements, although it is correct to include else between the two ifs. But never write a single if-else statement without writing the second if for finding the smallest, because it is absurd and will give you wrong results. After we finish from the loop, we need to print the value that is the largest, and we say largest is, and we print largest, and system.out.println, we say smallest is, and we print smallest. We need to test the program before we go to the other part, and now we need to enter some numbers. Let us put 34, 56, minus 90, 36, 120, 78, 89, 45, 80, and 56. And when we check the output, the program has printed that the largest is 120, and yes, in fact, largest is 120, and the smallest is minus 90 because this is the only negative number in the array. In part 4, we need to calculate the average of the elements of the array. And this is very simple to do because in part 2, we have already calculated the sum. So simply we divide the sum over the array size, which is equal to 10. To compute the average, we need to define a variable for the average, and we are going to call it average. And it's equal to sum divided by 10. Notice that sum is integer and 10 is integer, so the answer will be integer. Since all the numbers in the array are integer, so we want the average to be also an integer. System.out.println, and then we will say that the average is, and we print the value of the average. However, if you want to print the average in double, so you can define the average double and you do typecasting for sum to convert it to double, and then the answer will be in double. In part 5, we want to count the number of positive and negative numbers in the array. To count the number of positive and negative numbers, we need two counters. One for counting number of positives, we initialize it to 0, and the other one will be used to count number of negatives, also will be equal to 0. And then we will process the array from the beginning for integer I equals 0, I less than number.length, I plus a plus, and in each iteration we test for the indexed variable. We say if number I is greater than 0, then we will increment number of positives by 1. Else, if number indexed variable number I is less than 0, then we will increase number of negatives counter. Notice that for if after else, this is compulsory. Why? Because maybe the number is 0. So if the number is 0, we should not consider it as negative if we ignore if. This will find the answer, and now we need to display the result on the screen by saying the number of positive numbers, or let's say integers, is, and we print the value of positives. And for the number of negatives, we will copy the message, and we will say that the number of negative numbers or integers is, and we display the value of the variable negatives. Let us test the program first before we proceed. And now we need to enter 10 numbers: 23, 67, 89, minus 90, 35, minus 67, minus 100, 123, minus 56, and 89. So the average is 11, largest is 123, smallest is minus 100. The number of positive integers is 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the number of negative integers is 4. We have 1, 2, and 3, and the answer is correct. Finally, in the last part, we need to display the elements of the array in reverse order. To display the elements of the array in reverse order, simply process the array from the last element all the way down to the first element. And this can be done by the following. We write for integer I equal to the last element, which is number dot length minus 1, all the way down to the first element, and the index is decreased by 1. In every iteration, we simply print the value of the index variable, which is a print, and we are going to print them on single line separated by tab. So we will print the index variable numi followed by a tab. Let us check the result. We will run it. But we need to display a message before that by saying system.out.println, by saying the elements printed, or the integers, printed in reverse order, and then we have the for loop. Run the program. I'm going to enter the same numbers I have entered them before. I will copy them, paste, and then we come down. It is asking for 10 numbers. We will paste them and we will run the program. As you see that the numbers are printed in reverse order. The first number was 23. 23 is at the end now. So 89 minus 56, 1, 2, 3, until the last number, which is 23.